This is Dario Betti. I'm the industry evangelist for MEF, Mobile Ecosystem Forum. So thanks for being here, whether you are live on our webinar or whether you've seen us later in one of our broadcasts. If you are available now, well, great. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for taking the time. And you will also enjoy the ability to interact and chat with us. Just look at the little chat icon on the bottom of your screen. Now, I'm not here alone, and as you know, we're talking about personal data, and we have a fantastic title today of Personal Data: A New Awakening. It's a movie-like title. It could be another part of a saga of Star Wars, and sometimes it feels a bit like a Star Wars or a horror movie. Well, choose your favorite. But I'm glad that I got here Michael Becker, the strategic advisor at Assurant, and one of the famous person within MEF, the MEF environment, MEF ecosystem, that's been talking about personal data for quite a while, academically and business-wise. So, Michael, welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining us from the US.
Thanks, appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. So, Michael, we have a lot of material to go through. One of the things that I should probably say to everybody, the report is already available for download, so you should have it in your hands. If not, please go ahead and take it. This is your chance to ask questions. Michael was one of the authors themselves, so he knows a lot and knows everything about it. So, but let me ask probably for you to introduce yourself. It's very good, and then we could take it to the actual, if you want, introduction of the summary of what we've seen so far in the report. So, Michael, can you give us a few words about you and Assurant to start?
Yeah, sure. My name is Michael Becker. I'm a strategic advisor for Assurant, and I oversee the development of their identity and personal information management solutions. And I look at the market, as you pointed out, in 4 different perspectives, both from a product development perspective, a business development perspective, a market development perspective, and an academic perspective. I've written a number of papers and do a lot of academic research in this field as well. So looking at this concept of identity and personal information between those 4 pillars is kind of my passion, and I happen to be doing that right now, working with Assurant, who is the underwriter of this study. So on behalf of MEF and Assurant, we're thankful for having the opportunity to bring you these results. Yeah, and the slide you're seeing here right now is, I'm sorry, you were going to say something, Dario?
No, but just go ahead. I just wanted to give us some background of what this study is about. There you go.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about what we tried to accomplish with this study. And again, partly why did Assurant get involved with the MEF and doing this research last year? This is the 5th annual MEF trust study. So MEF took a leadership role in this idea that trust is going to reframe and frame the way consumers will have a relationship with businesses and industry going forward. In this 5th annual study, Assurant helped underwrite the program. And what we did is we studied 6,500 people across 10 different markets, particularly smartphone users. And as you can see, there's some stats on their smartphone usage and such. But the whole point of the study was to evaluate people's attitudes and behaviors at the intersection of privacy, personal data, and trust. And again, we did that across 10 markets and developed some really keen and interesting insights that came out of that.
Well, is it probably time to give, in a nutshell, some of the highlights and some of the story, Michael, that we've found? This year has been a very important year for us. Every project, every of the 5 different reports has been a great report and a great pleasure to work on. But this year, we seem to have some very grandiose, big results. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's again why we call the study the New Awakening or the Grand Awakening, because what we found is 2018 was really a tipping point, and sometimes you hear the joke where the doctor said he had a heart attack gradually and all of a sudden. I think in some ways the all of a sudden heart attack in 2018 happened for businesses, both in a good and bad way. I mean, essentially those types of events kind of wake us all up and realize that there are things that we need to do and take care of, but also in the process of taking care of them, create tremendous opportunity for us going forward. So I think in this study, depending on how you want to look at it, you're going to see things that are quite dramatic and could be challenging for the business, but you'll also see things that are of significant benefit and huge opportunity for businesses. But in this tipping point that we found for businesses in 2018, two real primary pillars is what drove pushing us over that edge. And that was all of the data scandals and or misuses of data that people became aware of in 2018. Really around primarily one of the big events was waking up around the Facebook Cambridge Analytica dialogue. People for the first time started to wake up and realize exactly how their information was being used, and not potentially in ways that they didn't necessarily understand. A lot of arguments that there was consent, there wasn't consent. We don't want to get into those types of details. It was more of people didn't necessarily understand before the level to which their personal data and identity were being used in industry, and to the exposure that created risk for them. And so people, again, were waking up with that. And it wasn't just a Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. I don't want to necessarily point just those players out. There was massive data breaches, not even following this study, with what we saw with updates to Yahoo's announcements about their breaches. We ended the year with, unfortunately, with Marriott and Starwood experiencing a fairly public and global breach. So again, this idea that and scandals, I want to be a bit careful with this word, is it can come across quite negative in some ways. It's more of people being unaware or waking up to the fact that they weren't sure how their data was being used. And again, you'll see in the numbers, like 41% of respondents says that the news about data misuse caused them to start losing trust. And then the other thing, but interestingly enough, the share of smartphone users who say trust is preventing them from using these services has somewhat declined. So we've seen some interesting, what could be contradictory insights there. They're losing trust, but yet they're still using services. And I think part of what we learned from that is they're continuing to use services simply because they have to. I mean, one of the important things that we need to be aware of is part of the tipping point in 2018 is that digital has, and mobile in particular, has infused itself throughout our daily lives in a way that we simply cannot use it, cannot be using those services. The other thing that we started to see is the whole implications of the emerging privacy and data regulations that were emerging into the marketplace. So, we heard things about, like, for instance, the GDPR coming out of Europe, or the California Privacy Protection Act coming out of California in the United States. And so the stories and the news around those regulations were waking people up. And then we also asked them in this study, do you believe you have rights? And again, 97% of people globally think they have rights around their data, how that data is being used, and more importantly, the communication that was happening around the GDPR, in particular in Europe. People were becoming aware of it. They saw that, and that helped and reinforce their rights. So this tipping point about scandals and rights being a key element really helped drive some of the key insights that we saw that are emerging in people's behavior.
Well, fantastic. So it's a very eventful year, you can say, for all the things that were happening and all the things that in the past kept on happening. This is the climax of many years of information dripping. Is that correct? Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and again, in studies like this, there's over 60 slides in the study and tons of data, even more data behind it. So when you get the study, you're going to see a lot more happening here. But if we were to bubble it all up to the core couple of pillars, it was the fact that the way data is being used and or misused in the market, and the fact that the governmental bodies that are there to protect the consumers are starting to put more enhanced and new regulatory models in the market that have teeth, are really the core pillars that shifted the market in 2018, unlike in the years past.
And here we go, one slide, we go straight to the core, one of the most interesting results. You were saying that people are taking action, correct?
So let me talk about that a little bit. Yeah, so when we talk about it, the Grand Awakening is really about people becoming aware. They're becoming aware of the risks and the opportunities. And again, we'll share with you a little bit more of those findings in just a few minutes. But beyond awareness, what's really important about what we found in this study worldwide across 10 markets is that people are starting to take action. They're starting to take, and that action is very consistent across mobile devices as well as computers. And when we say that what they're taking action is on average across the 10 markets, people are taking 2.3 actions to start protecting themselves, to start taking some action to take control of their identity and personal information back. Now, what's particularly interesting about this action and why we coined the study the Grand Awakening is roughly 26% of the people had taken their first action to protect themselves within the first 6 months of 2018. And another 50% of people had taken their first action within the last 2 years. So in the last 2 years, about 76% of people have started to take their first action to start actively protecting themselves. And you can see on this slide, and it's kind of it's hard to read in terms of the words when on the way it's on the slide, and so you get more detail. But some of those actions are they're installing antivirus protection software, they're adopting a password manager, they're installing tracker or ad blockers, or they're starting to use temporary or fake emails as a means of starting to protect their identity. And so what we found is of the 12 actions we surveyed people, 5 of those actions were technology related, meaning that they were installing or adopting some active or proactive technology to actively protect themselves. The other actions were more behavioral. They would go and change settings in their browser, or they would ask a company to delete them, aka enact some of their right to be forgotten rights. And that was that 7 to 8% number down that you see on the far left side. So again, long story here is that there are many actions that people can be taking to protect themselves. In just the last year, 2 years, they've just started to take those actions. Now, here's one other key insight that not readily available when you look at this slide in particular is the 2.3 actions that people are protecting themselves. Not one of those actions is really taking the lead. It's all over the map. So one of the insights that we found is while people are waking up, they're not really sure exactly what to do, and what people are doing is in fact pretty inconsistent. Some people are in some markets are doing this, some people in some markets are doing that. There's no real key global panacea. This is what I need to do to protect myself. It's so somewhat hit or miss for people right now. So that's another insight that we're starting to see. And again, fascinating results when we start thinking about that now, and maybe we can move on and we can talk a little bit about the implications of that for businesses. So why don't you share a little bit from as part of the contributors of the study as to how based on now we've talked about those actions, maybe you can help us dig in a little deeper, Dario.
Okay, well, in terms of some of the numbers that stuck out from me, let's go back to the action. People are doing a lot, is that true? So there seems to be a good intention. 76% is a good number. It shows, especially over the last year, it shows a big change from a small minority of people doing something to a large minority. But when you look at what they're doing, they're probably taking their computer historical action as well, trying different things. And I think if you look at each one of them, it's sensible. It doesn't seem to be one single or consistent approach to protecting your data. Is that correct? I mean, this is not enough. One way to say, oh, what job done? Well done to everybody. You seem to have mastered the art of personal data management. So there's something there.
Yeah, and actually, you raised another real point. As I kind of alluded to that, is on average we're taking about 2.3 actions. But what we found is another kind of insight. We don't necessarily have a slide for this, but because the data somewhat speaks to it, but not completely in this slide. But one of the things are in the complete study. But what we have found is there's basically 5 cohorts of people in the marketplace right now. There are the unaware. That's about 24% of the market. Those people, and they're kind of unaware or not taking any action. They haven't done anything. And so, if you were aware, I'm presuming that you would of the risks and such, we'll talk about in a minute, you'd start to take action. So the study revealed that about 24% of people fall in that camp of they're not really doing anything. They're not, they're kind of unaware and not motivated to take action. The next group is what we call the apathetic. The apathetic are the people that are saying, I get it, my data's out there, but there's nothing I can do, or what I can do is really not going to have that big of an impact. We then have the third group that we start seeing from the study, and I would put the vast majority of the people that are taking these 2.3 or more actions, and those are the people that are impaired. They're starting to take action, but the actions they're taking are really not enough to protect themselves, or they're more of a panacea action as something that will actually have efficacy and true results. And then finally, you have a significantly smaller group, if there's any of us that fall into that camp, which is called the empowered group. Those people that they're fully aware of what's happening. They feel completely empowered to take active steps in protecting their identity and personal information. And then finally, there's the enlightened group. And frankly, I don't think we have any kind of enlightened individual when it comes to data protections yet, because it's still that awakening stage of industry. So that's what we're starting to find out from these insights and such. And if you can go to the next slide, we can drill down a little bit deeper and get a bit more insight on the harms that people think or the risks that they think they're expressing. Again, a little bit more detail on the actions they're taking, and then the fragmented steps, just to provide a little bit more granularity in that. Dario, you want to share with us some of these numbers?
Absolutely. Going back, one big result in terms of attitudes that we've seen over the last year is that there's awareness about the risk itself. And it's important maybe to highlight that it's not just the privacy issue, which is important. So there is a data collection risk, 57% of people think so. There is also 47%. They will say that they do take this action because they want to prevent significant harm to themselves. That significant harms is referring not just to the privacy element, but also to the fraud element. So there is some of the big scandals, as we call them, or bad things happening in the personal data history, show then that they actually feel that there is a real financial risk on their side. So the discussion about personal data has grown way outside the simple privacy discussion to now have privacy and something else. One other data that I thought was very matching and to what you were saying before, Michael, as well, is that there are certain people that simply, even if they understand that there is a concern about privacy in data and fraud and personal data leakages, they simply say, I cannot do anything I'm not in control of what happens there. Those are some of the kind of disgruntled might be, or simply users that says, I cannot prevent it, it cannot happen. So it's the other side of the taking action. But if you put it all together, with people that are taking action, with people that are considering as a real concern, that's now becoming the majority. Once again, the tipping point we were talking before, right? So we're even seeing that is an unheard number in our history of a study that 63% of the people are willing to manage their own personal data. So there is a demand for doing something within that. So whether you are designing a new process, a new customer flow, whether you are thinking of a new app, or whether you're trying to optimize your existing one, you probably have to answer about these new trends of people feeling they're wanting to be more in charge of their own destiny when it's about data. We're still seeing numbers, and Michael was referring to one important point, which people are not stopping anymore, or even before were not stopping necessarily. They understand that there is an implicit price sometimes. Personal data is something they have to keep away to be in the digital economy. But look at some of them, and we still find that some of these people, despite generally going along with the flow, they still did not download an app or use a service at one point because some of those were asking too many permissions for their own personal data, 69% of that. So there are still some instances where they don't do stuff. And if you are one of those, you probably lost a customer because you were asking too many of the data, or you were not asking in a nice way, which way they understood. And so the same is about purchaser being abandoned, 63%. So I think you see that a real big shift, I think, to the overall sentiment but also, as Michael, you were saying, to the actual activity. People are not just feeling the problem, they're doing something about it.
Yeah, and on that point, I think that's really new. I mean, one of the things that's important is, remember, this is a grand awakening. People have been feeling or concerned about privacy since the 90s. We've had Harris poll studies in the United States since the late 1980s, early 90s, all the way up until now, saying, yes, I'm concerned about my privacy. But at the end of the day, they wouldn't really do anything about it. And in fact, what we're finding in this study for the first time is that people are in fact starting to do something about it. So that's particularly important for companies to be aware of and realize. The other thing I wanted to emphasize too is it's important for us when you're looking at this type of data and this type of insight to kind of look at the two numbers that on the top of the slide. The 57% say personal data collection is of risk to them. 47% are taking action to prevent significant harm. Let me tease those out a little bit too to understand what's happening. On one side, we have what's called privacy management. And privacy management is about the flows and the ability to have control over your personal information. That's one definition. There's a gentleman by the name of Alan Weston defined that back in 1967. And then on the other side, you have what's about harms mitigation. There's a gentleman by the name of Daniel Solov, a leading global legal pundit, who suggests that privacy is, especially if you look at it at a global scale like we've done in this study, you really can't define it. And it's more about how do you mitigate or manage the harms that may be incurred when your data or your privacy is misused or broken. In which case, he's recognized, I believe, nearly 21 different harms that one can incur. Everything from emotional anxiety to all the way up to identity theft and everything in the middle, loss of reputation, loss of time, loss of money, etc. And so when we're looking at the actions that people are taking, on one side, you have people trying to mitigate their harms. And then you have this emerging class of people that are wanting to start to take control over their personal information, to start taking more ownership and control. And those two things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but they're not necessarily the same thing either, that idea of privacy and security management. So we want to be thinking about that. And then if you were to add a triangle to it, that bottom piece of the triangle would be about compliance. And so one of the things that we're finding from this results, as we've been germinating our thoughts throughout the lens of the insights that the studies provided, is you really have this interesting intersection between privacy, security, risk, harm issues, industry compliance issues, all mirrored around this idea that people are trying to engage in the internet in a convenient and safe and secure way without having to forgo their privacy and security. And again, the insights are showing that people are waking up to this and wanting to essentially have their digital sovereignty, if you will.
Great. Let's move from some of the results, some of the theory, maybe, to the impact, because we at MEF, we like to talk about what that means for the business. So what's your view, Michael, of the next step? Given what we've heard so far of the changes in behavior, what should happen next?
So here's what happens next. First and foremost, pay attention to the events. And the big kind of categorical events are data scandals are impacting trust. When trust is impacted, as you've already pointed out in the studies as provided evidence of, when I don't trust you, I don't download your app, I delete your app, I don't interact with your business, I don't share data with you, I give you fake identity information. That's what people are doing because when they start distrusting you. And by the way, there's a secondary study from Edelman that's recognized that last year was one of the biggest years of distrust in the world globally. So one of the things another study you would want to follow up on. And then again, the regulatory elements, and that the fact that the countries around the world are waking up and states around the world are waking up and saying we need to put more protections in place. So those two kind of overarching events in 2018 really spearheaded quite a bit. And that led to, because of popular news and press and experiences that people were having, these behavioral changes where people were becoming aware of the risks, becoming aware of the opportunities to start taking control of their personal information. And so therefore they started to take action. but yet those actions are still very, very fragmented, and in some ways, make us feel good, but don't necessarily impact providing people true protection, control, or change over their personal information. So all of that leads into the fact that we've got some huge market opportunities going forward. In that, if you as a business are aware that people are starting to distrust, are starting to become aware of the regulations. So what are some of the reactions you can take from that? Start working on building trust. Start productizing regulation. Get it out of just a legal compliance checkbox and turn it into a primary tool to both build trust and to drive your business forward. Likewise, don't ignore the attitudes and behavioral changes that people are experiencing. If a high risk awareness and concern is there, do whatever you can in terms of content strategies and product development strategies to imbue and build into your products and services an element of safety and security, an element of trust. You want to be thinking about that. Look at the actions that people are taking. For example, start interpreting for your business. If people are starting to give you anonymized or fake emails, what does that mean to your business? What's going to start impacting your identity? So start looking at it granularly as well. And thank you for moving to this slide. Some of the key takeaways that you need to be thinking about or walking away from this industry and from this study is that this idea of the personal data market has matured. And the biggest element of this data market maturity is that people, individuals, the subjects of the data want to be participating in this economy just like the industry players. We are now starting to see this opportunity that people will want to start taking more control over their identity and personal information. And then ultimately, say 2 or 3 years from now, actively participate in the economic value exchange of their information. And that's a big topic, more so than we could just address in this webinar. But this whole idea of enabling people to participate in the value exchange of their personal information is something that the MEF and industry will certainly be addressing going forward. And this study establishes a very clear foundation for why that is going to happen sooner rather than later. The next insight and what you want to take away from this study is to realize that education is absolutely necessary. People are starting to take action, but they don't really know what to do. They don't know why to do it. They don't know how to do it. And the vast majority of the people are in those 2 cohorts or the 3 cohorts of unaware, apathetic, or impaired. We need to find a way to educate people, to empower them, to give them the right tools to be able to start taking control of their identity and personal information. And then finally, recognize that trust is and in fact, Don Pepper is one of the leading industry leaders in this concept of trust, is recognizing that trust may in fact become the core differentiator between your business and your competitor's business going forward. So you really want to take a step back and start thinking about, how do people trust my business? Why do people trust my business? What am I doing to imbue and enable that trust? And one of the insights that we came from the study, and Dario, maybe you can pull this up for people, is what does trust mean to people? What trust means to people is transparency. It means clarity of communications and control. And so we'll show you some of those the insights as well to help you understand a little bit more about trust. But long story short, that's what you need to be doing going forward and taking and actually taking action against these insights that we're sharing with you in this study, is that the personal information economy is coming. It's actually, in fact, here, and that you need to start building for it. That we need to start educating and empowering our customers with the appropriate tools and services and content, so that they can in fact start feeling empowered and start being in a position to take control of their information. And then this leads us to that point of trust. And the another point I'll point out about trust is, when we surveyed people like, who do you trust to be in control of your personal information, resoundingly the number one result was, and I believe if I remember the number correctly, 47% of the people, the resounding result number was 47% of us trust ourselves to protect our personal information. So as a business, what that means is you need to find a way to be able to imbue the ability for people to co-create and co-manage their personal information and identity with you if you really want to be establishing that trust. Now, again, Daria, maybe you want to talk a little bit about what trust means here, backing up that point.
Yes, I think you will find some of the quotes and some of the messages in the report. But I think it's very important to say that trust is a building block for the success of application and mobile services. And there is an immediate expectations that you will stop downloading or stop acting on something that if there is a question of trust. Interestingly, some of the numbers I've seen at the beginning and mentioned, people are getting used to the economy of having to do something and accept it. But that is not true for all of the apps. There are some points where, especially for unknown brands or for new brands, that the user might react and not trust in the overall experience, get away. So the key points that we've seen so far, 21% of people say that they would like an immediate notification if anything happens to their personal data with help. We have seen some of the existing scandal is a big word, but bad things happening. And some of the learnings, even from those one, is how you deal with the aftermath of something, and being aware since the beginning that these data and the treasure of the data itself will be looked after by the company. The safety of data, where is it stored, how safety it is stored, very difficult to discuss, but that's some of the claim for transparency and service trust the company wants, the users wants from company as well. And finally, but similarly very close in terms of importance, 19%, people expect a clear explanation of what personal data is gathered and how it will be used. That's probably really 101 if you know some of the customer flow of some of the applications we have right now. But nevertheless, it's not always done perfectly well, and it's not really clear of why your light application should know where you are and who your friends are. And that's a real example we've seen in the past. So I think people are gathering that, they need to put some filters out there in terms of how and what data to share with people and when to share with. Yep. I think there is more that we can say and we should be saying in terms of the more implication for the industry. But as we have the luxury of talking live and we have some of our members and participants out there, I would probably remind that it's probably the right time to raise your hand, say something. If you haven't agreed on anything that you've read in the consumer report for 2018, or anything you've heard which you agree or disagree with, this is the right time. Please let us know. Also, separate discussions we do have for the 6,500 respondents divided into 10 countries. We have collected the information, and if you're interested in Brazil rather than UK or USA, if you're a member of MEF, all of that information is available for you to dwell and to drive your own conclusion. So please let us know of any of the questions you might have. Meanwhile, almost in conclusion, Michael, I'd like to ask you, what's the biggest takeaway you got from this 6-month study on consumer trust?
Yeah, my biggest takeaway is the Grand Awakening, ergo the title of the study, that people are waking up. They are, and in that process, they're becoming aware of both the risks and the opportunities that the role their identity and personal information is playing out in the marketplace, and they are starting to take action. The actions that they're initially taking are protective actions. They're starting to essentially, circle the wagons, as they say, to start protecting and isolating their data in a way that they can start finding a way to get more control. But what we're also finding is that there simply aren't enough tools out there or enough education out there to help them move from that apathetic and impaired state to more of an empowered state. What we also started to see is the grassroots of what's next. Well, what's next is that people, once they've protected themselves, are going to want to start understanding the role of their data, and then eventually actively participate in a value exchange of their data. So I really encourage our audience in the MEF membership to listen to this webinar, look at this study, look at some of the high-level results, and recognize that what's happening is that the idea that identity and personal information are actually, and the ability to safely and securely enable the management of that information within that whatever product or service you provide to the market, is becoming a critical and core attribute for every business going forward. So in some respects, I've given some talks recently about how privacy or security is the new luxury good. So one of the questions I would challenge you to start thinking about is what are the attributes that you're imbuing within your products and services to signal that people can trust you, to signal that you are transparent, to signal that you are treating this idea of privacy and security as a core attribute of your good or service, because that will be a key differentiator for your business, not just this year in 2019, but most certainly in the years to come.
Okay. Well, there was a comment I'd like to make, but before that, just noticed there are two questions I didn't answer. So the first one from Rita Vanska, she's asking the different profiles name. And I think what we'll try to do is to, well, Michael, would it be good for you to quickly remind them, or we can later on in our blog following this, we'll be able to write it down. But can you just mention the
different cohorts? Yeah,
I think it's referring to the cohorts, yes.
Yeah. So there is what we call the unaware. Those are the people that, and I'll say them all and then I'll define them again. There's the unaware, the apathetic, the impaired, the empowered, and the enlightened. And the enlightened is like what I'll call the digital Buddha. It's somebody that is just like perfect sovereignty, total control, and peace when it comes to the role of their identity and personal information. I don't think any of us are there yet. So reality, we're playing with the top four. I think, again, the insights are showing us that about 24% of people fall in the unaware camp. About 24-25% of people fall in the apathetic camp. You then have another, I'd say, 25 to 30% that are in the impaired camp. But one could actually argue that 76% of people are in the impaired camp because they're at least starting to take action. So just because you're apathetic doesn't mean that you're not taking action. So I think that combined, that apathetic impaired camp is about 76% of the audience. And then as for the empowered, I don't think we're there yet. I mean, my gut's telling me that we're maybe 3, 4, 5% of the market, but we didn't really study that. And so I don't have a number to put on the, how many people actually feel they're empowered. But just to summarize then, it's the unaware, the apathetic, the empowered, the apathetic, the impaired, the empowered, and the enlightened. Those are the 5 cohorts.
Okay, well, from Thomas, we also have a question with the segments to understand. Thomas Ward asks, is it likely that this shift is going to become greater amongst millennials and the Generation Z?
Absolutely, no doubt, without question. And in fact, there's a 2013 Pew Internet study in the United States that looked at some of the actions that people were taking to protect themselves. And interestingly enough, it was the younger groups that would take more actions to protect themselves than the older groups. The older groups would take 2 or 3 actions. So of 12 actions, the older groups would take 2 or 3, and the younger groups would take 8 or 9. So and again, we maybe at some point we can dig into our data a little bit and look at that a little bit more as well. But it's very clear that the young, and this is a misnomer that I hope we all walk away from this conversation we're having today and break this myth. There's this myth that the youth don't care about their privacy, that the millennials or Generation Z or Generation Alpha don't care about their privacy. The result is they actually do, but they will forego their privacy and security for the convenience and value that can be generated from digital and internet services. And that's not just the youth, that's all of us. But what we find, and that it's a term what we find in industry called the privacy paradox. But when it comes to the youth, we find the youth on average taking more actions to protect themselves, doing more to ensure that they can assemble some control over their identity and personal information. So Thomas, you're absolutely correct that as those generations get older, we're going to see very significant shifts in the marketplace and the expectations that prospective consumers have of your businesses.
We probably have another 5 minutes, so to anybody that might have still more questions, please to ask us, but I think that there is an interesting natural conclusion to what we were saying before. So we are seeing that there is a new industry coming, and there is probably some people have defined it a personal data economy emerging. So this is now becoming a small business in itself. The securing, the managing of personal data is now becoming something more. And you mentioned it, something else, the identity in its own right, and identity
Yeah,
is
yeah,
something.
yeah.
These are two topics, by the way, that I'd like to mention that the MEF is planning to move ahead and do more research.
And let me share some quantifications on that. You say it's a new industry and it's emerging, but yet it's not small. In the UK alone, it's estimated that it's probably a $16 billion industry right now. By 2020, the management of identity alone is estimated to be a $1 trillion market, $1.1 trillion market, with about $700 million of that flowing back to the individual in measurable value. So business models are changing. The flows of data management are changing in very big ways. And so, in such that when the fundamental difference between the previous data economy and the personal information economy is that the individual, the data subject, is taking an active role in the management and participation in the exchange of their personal information. That's the unique switch that's starting to happen in the market. And tools are starting to come out. What's called personal information management solutions are starting to emerge to enable and give people that control. And so again, you as brands and businesses need to be thinking about what does that mean to your business with this emerging economy and what we have here. Now, the other point that I want to make about this emerging economy, some of you that may not have heard about this before are going to say, wow, this is totally new. We've got time. Well, it is totally new, but you don't have time. You probably have 2 to 3 years to prepare for this until this becomes a mass market movement globally. And the reason why is because this has been boiling slowly. We're actually in the 4th generation of the personal information economy. And again, academically and strategically, at another time, we can share with you the huge arcs. But in the United States, at least, it went from about 1900 to 1990 was the first wave. 1990 to about 2006 was the second wave. 2006 to 2015 was the third wave. And 2015, or actually 2006-7 to 2020 will have been the third wave. And the fourth wave, the true emergence of a mass market personal information economy, we're going to start seeing emerge around 2020, 2021. So we don't have a lot of time because the market is shifting and it's shifting dramatically. The other analogy I will give is that you have a massive tsunami that's about to hit the shores of the world's economies and your industry. And when the water recedes from that wave having hit the shores of your business, the topology of the land will forever be changed, and the rules and the nature of the business is going to be forever changed. So, and again, some of the undercurrents with that are, for instance, like GDPR, California Privacy Protection Act, the emergence of new tools like the personal information management services, et cetera, are coming. So start doing all the research you possibly can on the emergence of the personal information economy, because it will have a material effect on your business and you personally in your future of your careers.
Now, time is almost up, and it's almost naturally we moved away from the consumer trust report to the actual implication and very excitement about the personal data economy and the identity market out there. So I think it's time to look at what to do next. But I hope for all of our members and readers, viewers, that you can download, read, and we're always interested to see your comments. But our consumer trust report is available for you, so do let us know any of that and download the report itself. To Michael,
yeah, and feel free to send us questions directly or interact. It doesn't have to end here. In fact, hopefully it's just starting now.
Great. So a double thank you for all the work done so far, and the one in future to answer your questions. So please do engage. We're very happy at Mobile Ecosystem Forum to continue this dialogue. To all of you again, thank you. To Michael, thank you. And we'll continue talking about personal data quite a lot over the next year in 2019 and 2020. So stay tuned with us. Thank you again.
Thanks. Bye-bye.